Hi, everyone. My name is Hailey. I'm Girl Scouts of Silver Sage's lead community coordinator. And I just wanted to hop on to give you guys some information. So, right now we are forming troops. And of course, you know that we have camps going on this summer. We're doing virtual troops and so many other fun opportunities. And I wanted to let you guys know that if you have friends or if you know of someone who wants to be a Girl Scout, we have so many opportunities for them. So I just wanted to come on and let you and your caretakers and your parents and all of your adult humans know that we're doing virtual recruitments or virtual open houses for you and your friends to come and learn about what Girl Scouts is. So if you aren't a Girl Scout or you know someone who you think should be a Girl Scout, here's all the information you need to know on the screen. I don't know which way it goes, but on the screen you can find more information about how to attend our open house. And you can invite all your friends to go, or you can go if you're not a Girl Scout yet. We're doing the Think Like an Engineer badge on that, so you can do a badge activity and just ask questions with us and see if Girl Scouts is for you. So we have one this Thursday at 11 a.m. and 6 p.m. So you can invite your friends to go to that to see if Girl Scouts would be a good fit for them. Or if you're not a Girl Scout, you can attend that too. And if you have any questions, please comment below and I'll try to reach out to you and to let you know anything you need to know. Thanks for letting me come in, Sarah and Mattie. Bye.
Thanks so much, Hailey, for jumping in real quick. Well, welcome to our Geology of National Parks episode. Today, we are talking about Arches National Park and Canyonlands National Park. My name is Mattie. I'm the program manager for Girl Scouts of Silver Sage, and I have spent time studying geology. I taught high school geology, and I also volunteered at a geology museum for some time. Sarah, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. I am Sarah. I'm the program coordinator for Girl Scouts of Silver Sage. I also studied geology and taught geology, and I love just going on trips to these wonderful national parks.
Thank you. So we're so excited today. We've spent a lot of time talking about glaciers and mountain building, and today we get into something a little bit different, which is desert and erosion, which is something that I totally nerd out about, and I know Sarah will totally nerd out about, so we're excited to have you here. The story of Arches and Canyonlands National Park begins about 65 million years ago. At that time, this area was a dry seabed from horizon to horizon. And if you were to stand there, the features we see today would have been buried thousands of feet below you, raw materials still yet uncarved. And then the landscape slowly began to change. Arches National Park became a national park in November of 1971, and Canyonlands became a national park in September of 1964. Sarah, would you like to take us on a quick tour through Arches and Canyonlands?
I would love to. All right, everybody. First off, we are going to do Canyonlands National Park. So we have a few different places that were really fun in this park. It's a pretty big one, too. The first place is called Mesa Arch. This is probably one of the coolest places to get a picture in this park, especially at sunrise. It's most popular during sunrise, and it's not a very long hike to get there. It's only about half a mile, so it's not super hard. And the whole time that you go, you get to see all these native plants and all these beautiful sceneries, and then this is at the very end of the trail. So it's a really fun hike to do just in the morning when you're waking up and getting ready to go for the day. The second one is called Island in the Sky District, or the Grand View Overlook. So this is the Grand View Overlook of the Island in the Sky. This is full of 1,000-feet cliffs that were carved by the historic rivers in the area and the rainfalls and all of these flash floods that come into this area. They carved out all these different canyons. Kind of looks like the Grand Canyon from above. And the last one we're going to look at in Canyonlands is called the Needles District. And this is a personal favorite because I love the way that you can see the layers in these rocks. This one has super cool hiking, super cool backpacking places. It's the perfect place to check out all these different features and how erosion plays a part in these parks, which we're going to talk about later. So that is Canyonlands. And then we have Arches National Park. So this one's probably a little more familiar to those of you that aren't from around the area. If you've seen pictures of southern Utah, I bet you've seen this one. This is called Delicate Arch, and in a park with over 2,000 stone arches, this is easily the most popular and recognizable arch in the park. If you've ever seen a Utah license plate, this is on the old Utah license plate. The opening itself is over 46 feet tall and 32 feet wide, and it's the largest freestanding arch in the entire park. The trail to it is 3 miles long round trip, so not super long, but it has a little bit of an elevation gain, but it's well worth the trip in my opinion. The second one is called Fiery Furnace District. We're going to have a theme in these desert areas. They're going to have a lot of fire words in them. So this one is best described as a maze. So there are no actual recognizable or established trails in this area. People just kind of wander through these slot canyons and these differently eroded formations, but you have to be really careful because if we don't have established trails, it's super easy to get lost. And so it's easier to just make sure you know where we're going and having a GPS on you at all times when you're in this area. The third one is called the Window Arches. These are two almost identical arches side by side. They're over 1,000 feet wide and they're a super easy walk to get to. You can almost drive right up to them. And our last one we're going to talk about is Devil's Garden. So like I said, a lot of fiery type of words. This is an 8.1 mile loop, so it's a little bit longer, but it shows 7 different natural arches, a bunch of different ecological and geological features. You get to see all these native plants to southern Utah, which is why they call it a garden. And it's just a really fun hike to see all these different things that you would see in southern Utah. All right, so now we're going to tell you about how these formations were made.
Yeah, I'd love to. If you have any questions, please drop them in the comments. I'd also love to know how many people have been to Arches or Canyonlands. They're both in Utah, so if you visited there, there's a good chance you might have gone. So please drop in the comments if you have been to either of these national parks, and if you had a favorite thing you saw, we'd love to hear about it. One of our coworkers just went to Arches, I believe like 2 weeks ago, so some of these pictures are actually from her. So you're probably wondering how we got these weird structures, especially out of rock, something so solid. And the way that we define that is between chemical and physical weathering. So physical weathering is something that describes a change in the structure of the rock, the actual physical structure of the rock. It's sometimes called mechanical weathering. Those two terms get tossed up and down. But anything that shatters a rock, rubs away its surface, creates cracks inside of it are examples of physical weathering. Some of these we've covered in some of our past episodes, especially about glaciation. So one of them is wedging, which is when water or substances get stuck inside of holes of rocks and kind of crack it open. Another is exfoliation, when rocks rub against a larger rock and kind of brush it away. And that's really something that happens a lot in the desert, where wind picks up rocks and uses it to kind of polish rocks around it. The next one is abrasion, which is when rocks are rubbed together. And the last is thermal expansion. As Sarah mentioned, it's so hot in these areas, it's a desert. And so the heat will actually cause these rocks to expand and contract, which can cause different cracks in them to form. And the next type of weathering is called chemical weathering. So this actually changes the chemical composition of the rocks and can make some really cool things happen. I love this graphic because it kind of divides it into the 4 ways that chemicals affect rocks. The first is a reaction with water. So sometimes rocks can absorb water and it will change its chemical composition. Reaction with oxygen. So oxygen inside of rocks might oxidize and cause them to rust and give it a very red color. reactions with acid. So acid rain or carbonation is when carbon and sulfur and nitrogen gets into the water and can cause it to become very acidic, and that can actually melt down rocks. And the last is reaction with organisms. So organisms can actually affect rocks and change their composition.
And what's really cool is you can actually see the top two very easily in all of the parks in southern Utah.
Oh, yeah. So a really great example of this is actually the collapse of Wall Arch in 2008. So some of our viewers might not have even been born yet, but Wall Arch was a really, really cool feature you can see here on the left that would come outwards, and it fell after thousands and thousands of years of erosion, wind, water, animals, different vegetation growing into it. The arch did collapse. And that's part of these parks, is that they're created by erosion, and eventually they will be almost like torn down by erosion too. So we've talked a lot about, actually, next slide, please. Oh, never mind, go back one. So we've talked a lot about mountains in our live series and mountain forming. In general, the power of uplift of a mountain is really, really strong and greater than that of erosion. And that's why we still have mountains here, right? But through time, water and wind will start to erode these mountains into canyons. But what happens when there isn't water in these areas, like a desert? Without an abundance of water, chemical weathering will decrease. There's no water to start it, but physical weathering will increase. In dry climates, soil forms very slow, and a lot of bedrock remains exposed to the elements. Physical forces in the desert that can break down rocks include, as I mentioned, daily heating and cooling, expansion of plant roots. So as plants dig their roots into rocks, it may break them apart. Freezing and melting of ice, and exposure to wind and precipitation, especially during storms. We mentioned that rivers aren't the only force of erosion, and this is really shown in a desert where often you don't see long-term rivers. Instead, we experience super crazy summer thunderstorms, which was one of my favorite things to experience when I studied geology in Utah, were these crazy thunderstorms. So during the summer, these thunderstorms bring super heavy rains that scour the landscape, and some layers of rocks are going to erode away easier than others. Those layers might form exposed shelves or be the base to a balancing rock because it's on a really strong piece of rock. A lot of examples of these that Sarah had mentioned is Monument Basin at Island in the Sky and Land of Standing Rocks in the Maze. The landscape of Canyonlands and arches is a perfect example of erosion. As the area gradually rose, rivers that once deposited the sediment then began to remove it again. The Green and Colorado rivers began carving into that geologic layer cake that Sarah will talk about here in a moment, exposing sediments and creating the canyons of Canyonlands and arches. As for the work of erosion, it continues today. Today's geologic displays of essentially artwork will eventually disappear, making way for future wonders. Sarah, you want to take it away and tell us more about the rocks?
Of course. So just like Mattie said, the story of Arches National Park is one of lots of rivers or oceans or lake sediments being deposited at almost sea level. We have mainly sedimentary rocks. If you remember, a few weeks ago, we talked about the rock cycle, and we have mainly sedimentary rocks in this part of the world. Some layers are a little more popular than others, according to some geologists. They were laid down. Some were laid down by rivers, others by swamps even. Over time, they would pile up, just like this cake that Mattie talked about. If you've ever seen a layered cake, it's just like rocks. You see these different colors, and you can see them in the rock themselves after they've been eroded. You can see all these different colors piled on top of one another. And then about 10,000 years ago, what Mattie was talking about with the uplifting of mountains, the same thing happened here. So we had this uplift of the rocks. Something changed in the Earth's structure, and it uplifted these. And then we have this fresh rock that was way above everything else. And so the water and the wind and everything started battering down on it and breaking it down and finding the softer rocks and pushing them away and leaving the harder rocks. And this process, like Mattie said, continues every single day. No, not just in southern Utah, but everywhere. The three, so we see this stratigraphic column. It's what we like to call it as geologists. This is a column of Arches National Park and Canyonlands, the same area, of all of the different formations of rocks that we see. So formation is just a group of rocks that have been put together that come around the same time frame or the same type of rock and sometimes contain the same fossils. So the three big formations in this one. This is my personal favorite. This is called the Dakota Sandstone. This is, like it says, it's a sandstone. It's made of sandstones, mudstones, and shales. So mudstones and shales are like sandstones, just super fine sand. So you can't really see the sand as much as a regular sandstone. And this one was deposited in the Cretaceous era. So if you think about it, this is when the dinosaurs died off. So we have some evidence of dinosaur life in these rocks. The next one is the Navajo Sandstone.
My favorite.
That's Mattie's favorite. So the Navajo Sandstone was deposited in the late Triassic. It's probably the most popular formation found in southern Utah. It's pretty much everywhere down there. And what's interesting to us is the Navajo Sandstone is one of the top formations in the Grand Canyon. We also find it in the Grand Canyon, but it's at the very, very top of the Grand Canyon. And so for us, in Arches National Park, the Navajo Sandstone actually shows up right here near the middle. And so you can see that uplift that we are talking about happening here, where this is the middle of the formation, it's at the very top of the Grand Canyon. And then the last one, I think this is actually the Navajo Sandstone, if I'm not mistaken. Sorry about that. This is the Morrison Formation. This is the coolest rock formation ever, according to many, many geologists. This is where you find 90% of all dinosaur fossils. So this was deposited in the Jurassic. So this is where we find the T-Rexes and the long-necked dinosaurs and all of the things that you see in dinosaur books, you'll find in this rock formation. This is mudstones, sandstones, shales, just like everything else in this park. They're very, very sedimentary based.
There's a really cool museum outside of St. George in Washington, in which there are tracks. So there was a large lake in that area, and a lot of dinosaur tracks are actually perfectly preserved as if they were coming to this lake. There's also a lot of ripple marks and evidence of waves. And they built the museum on top of the tracks so that they wouldn't have to remove it or take it away. And so if you visit southern Utah, you can go to that dinosaur track museum and see you can see the dinosaur walk and then where it would sit, and it's perfectly preserved. It's a really cool place to visit.
And this picture here of the Navajo Sandstone is actually a perfect image of our erosion and our chemical weathering as well. So you see our physical weathering with the hole, the window at the top of the picture and those little divots carved out. But you also see the chemical weathering with this black color. That's where the water has changed the composition of the rock. So this is a perfect example of chemical and physical weathering. If you go to places like
park, honestly, in Utah area, Arizona, you'll see very colorful rocks, and you'll know it's not the layer, it's been actually colored by the water, like Sarah was saying, pouring over those rocks and creating what they call desert varnish.
All right, another thing we wanted to talk about in this one is called a dark sky preserve. So we've covered a couple of these parks, but the United States and internationally has dark sky parks, which means that these parks are meant to preserve the night sky. They have night sky friendly light bulbs, and they keep the light down to a minimum level. And so this picture here is kind of the scale of light pollution that you would see. So a 1 in light pollution means there's very, very little light. And an 8 or a 9 means there's lots and lots of light. So think of an 8 or a 9 is probably New York City or Chicago or big, big cities that you see like that. And a 1 is in the middle of the desert where there is no one around for miles. And so I think the only, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mattie, the only 1 in the United States is actually Death Valley.
I believe that's right.
And then the other dark sky preserves are in the 2s and 3s. And so some really cool places that are also dark sky preserves are Craters of the Moon in Idaho. And then we have a huge Central Idaho International Sky Preserve. We also have Death Valley and the Grand Canyon and Canyonlands, and all of these different national parks are so good about keeping the light pollution down, making sure that these animals that live in this park are able to use that sun and night cycle to keep their lives going, to know when to hunt, to know when to sleep, because unlike us, animals don't have an alarm clock. Animals don't have watches. So they use the sun and the night and the stars to be able to know when to do certain things.
We thought it would be interesting if, just looking at this picture, we know we have a lot of girls from all over watching this. So if you want to comment what number you think the sky outside looks like for you, Sarah and I were talking about it, and we think Boise is around a 5, but we'd love to hear where you're from and what you think the sky at night looks like where you're at.
Or if you've ever seen a 1 or a 2, that'd be pretty cool. I've only been to a couple places that had a 2. I've been to Death Valley though, so I've seen the 1. And then we wanted to show you a picture. This is Canyonlands at night. And so this is just a 2. Can you imagine seeing a 1? So this is pretty fantastic. It's pretty amazing to see. You can see the galaxies. You can see all these different stars. You can see up to 15,000 stars at night at Canyonlands National Park. And in comparison, people in cities, even as small as Boise, can only see about 500 stars at night.
Oh, wow. That's a crazy comparison.
All right.
Girls, if you have any questions about arches, canyonlands, erosion, the desert, the night sky, this is your opportunity to ask. So please drop your comments and questions in the comment box, and we're ready to answer them. I know Sarah and I had been talking about if you have ever seen the movie 127 Hours, that actually occurred in Canyonlands, which Sarah talked about has a lot of those really narrow slot canyons that he ended up getting stuck in. And it just shows how dangerous hiking in the desert really can be if you're not prepared for it.
Yeah, it's definitely important to think about the rule of packing for yourself plus one other person when you're in the desert, because things can go south very quickly. It can get very hot, or you can get lost, or just the most random things occur when you're hiking.
And I would say flash flood is the worst.
A flash flood. Then you won't be short on water, though. It'll be the opposite problem.
Yeah, but for those of you who are thinking of visiting arches and canyonlands, it's really important to make sure you know what the weather is going to be like during that time, because a lot of places will have to close certain trails due to flash flood warnings. And make sure that you're prepared and you know what you're going to need to pack, where you're going, because it's out in the desert and you want to be prepared for that.
Mattie, I know you have a good rule of thumb for kind of figuring out if we're going to have a flash flood in the slot canyon.
Yes. Okay. So when I used to go hiking, the rule of thumb I learned from my geoscience teacher is that if you see the water in the river or the creek start to turn muddy, you need to head home. And what that means is that higher up the creek, there's a lot more water coming that's really stirring up the silt and mud in the creek. And so usually that stuff stays pretty solid at the bottom and it's getting churned up. So if you're ever hiking, you see the water start to turn muddy, it's time to turn around and head back home.
That's a great rule of thumb.
Yeah, and Bruno has an observatory, right?
Yes, Bruno does have an observatory. There's a couple observatories in southern Idaho.
Well, please put any other comments or questions that you have. We'll take a couple more minutes to answer them. Otherwise, thank you all for watching this. We have had such a blast doing this series. We mentioned it in our last episode, but this is our last episode. Sarah and I are working together on something fun and new, and we will be telling you more about it as soon as we have the details all put together. So it's been such a great time getting to explore the geology of national parks with you all. All right, Sarah.
All right, Jess,
We'll see
thank
you
you.
later, guys. Thank you so much.